We're back with the bonus conversation you'll only see here on CBS News New York. So, Annemarie, what do you make of the fact that the former president's legal team asked the grand jury to hear testimony from Michael Cohen's former lawyer? Obviously, he was trying to undermine Michael Cohen's credibility, but is there anything unseemly about a lawyer representing a former client and trying to undermine a former client in a grand jury?
Well, it depends. Now, in this case, apparently Michael Cohen did waive the attorney-client privilege. If he had not done that, then this would have been much more problematic. But given that he apparently in writing did previously waive the attorney-client privilege and allow his attorney to speak about what their conversations were, he was able to do so. And the grand jury it's certainly a one-sided proceeding. The defense doesn't have somebody in there. There's no attorney for cross-examination purposes and so on. It's just a proceeding run by the prosecutors. But you're still supposed to present all the evidence. So that would include exculpatory evidence so that the grand jury has a full picture and then can make a determination as to whether they think they should go forward.
So presupposing there is an indictment, what would be the pretrial challenges?
Well, one is certainly logistics and security, and how do you bring him up here? Is he going to be held in jail? What role does the Secret Service have? Is he a flight risk? I mean, he does have an airplane, and he could fly away. However, the Secret Service is tasked with protecting him and also enforcing the laws of the United States.
I hate to interrupt you, but remember, this is the DA who doesn't believe in bail for anybody. I mean, you know.
Well, that's the irony. Well, that's one of the things that gets certainly New Yorkers going, and that the fact that there's so many crimes being committed that are being taken from being felonies and knocked down to being misdemeanors. And here we have a case that's a misdemeanor being bumped up to a felony, or they're apparently trying to. And there's so many cases where people have been killed and maimed and beaten in New York recently, and you don't seem to get a lot of prosecutions out of that, and yet here we have this case. So do you think it's possible, if he were indicted, that Mr. Trump could get a fair trial in Manhattan? It's possible, I would guess. I mean, I'm sure he's going to ask for a change of venue and say that he can't get a fair trial here because. But it would have to be someplace in the state. Yeah, it's a New York prosecution, so yes, it should be. You know, it might be somewhere upstate or somewhere else. But the reality is, I don't know where you would go to get a jury that hasn't been immersed potentially in the press coverage of this. On the other hand, all the jurors need to say is, I can be fair and impartial. It doesn't mean that you didn't have to, a juror doesn't have to be in the position of never having read anything or heard anything about a case or about a defendant. They just need to be able to honestly, hopefully, say, I can be fair and impartial. And if they can do that, the judge can put them on the jury. So do you think, I mean, what's the over or under that if there's a case brought, that the case stays in Manhattan or gets moved to another jurisdiction? I'm sure Bragg would like to keep it here. It'll be assigned to some judge locally who probably, depending on the judge's views, would probably like to keep it. They'll get a lot of publicity nationwide and internationally as well. So they may well keep it here. But whatever. But you still expect his lawyers to make a motion, if he gets indicted, to move it out of Manhattan? Sure. Yes, and logistically, too, that may be part of the issue, because for security purposes, it may be very difficult to have that case in New York, to be able to move him around in a way that keeps everybody safe. So it may be easier in a smaller area where they can keep more control from a just physical security standpoint as well. Do you think that it would be possible that if he is tried in Manhattan, that a jury could acquit him? Certainly, it certainly is, especially again with the facts that we know at this point. It probably doesn't even reach the jury, but if it does, there's so much conflict as far as what's the truth from Michael Cohen, so many contradictory statements from him, and that's really what they have to rely on. Again, assuming that what we've heard is the extent of the charges that they're looking at, unless there's something else.
So do you think the statute of limitations problems are insurmountable? And is that going to be obviously a pretrial motion as well?
It definitely will be a pretrial motion on that. The way it's been reported thus far, it is insurmountable. It's possible that they might in some way try, I don't know if there's somehow that they're going to try to claim there's some sort of conspiracy, that's an ongoing conspiracy that would pull them into more recent territory that would allow them to bring this case. But the way the charges have been reported thus far as to what they're expected to be, it's absolutely time barred. So
do you think that the criminal justice system's reputation for impartiality is at risk here?
I do, and I think it's a difficult thing. And you know, as a former prosecutor, and when I teach, I try to teach my students too that as a prosecutor, even sometimes if you have a right to bring a case, you have to look at, is there justice in bringing the case? What's the right thing to do? And you have prosecutorial discretion. And you're supposed to weigh out all of the factors, including who your witnesses are, what your chances are going forward, what are the implications overall, and then make hopefully a just decision as a prosecutor as to whether this is a case you should proceed on or not. And here, at least again, from what we've heard, it's certainly a shaky case. And to bring a case that may well be knocked out in pretrial motions against the former president who's running to be president again, it would seem to be a bit of a stretch, and certainly makes people question, especially given the fact that there's so much crime in New York that's not being prosecuted, where you have violent crimes that are being bumped down to misdemeanors. I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
So basically what you're really saying is that if he brings this case, he should be rock certain that he has a case, that it's not going to be knocked down in a pretrial motion of some kind.
Right. Generally, most prosecutors, if you know that you have a case that's going to get a lot of scrutiny, that's going to be against somebody who's very well known, you try to make sure you have a very strong case, because you don't want to look like a fool out there as a prosecutor. You don't want to get a lot of bad press. Nobody wants that. And you want to make sure that the public has faith in the system. And so you want to make sure you have all of your ducks in a row before you take any action. Again, certainly from what we've heard, maybe there's something else that we haven't heard, but if the charges are only relating to this supposed business records issue and Stormy Daniels and the payment there, it's a very weak case, especially given the importance of who's involved and is running for president currently. And you don't want to be in a position where a prosecutor is trying to put their thumb on the political process and the scales there. And it could certainly be viewed that that is potentially what he's trying to do, which is not a good look for a prosecutor.
I think we're going to have to leave it right there. Annemarie McAvoy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.